Hello, everyone. Joining me now, Michael Maibach, Distinguished Fellow from Save Our States. And what we're going to talk about is an issue that a lot of people maybe don't understand. And we're talking about the Electoral College. Why did the founders create the Electoral College? Let's just get very basic, something we learned in school.
It is a fundamental question. You always go back to the roots. So at the Constitutional Convention, there were 12 delegations of the 13 states. Rhode Island did not attend because they so feared the Virginians. Virginia was the largest state in population. There were 4 large states with population. Virginia, then Pennsylvania, Philadelphia being the largest city in the country at the time, New York, because of New York City, and Boston, and Massachusetts included Maine at the time. Those were the big 4. The other 9 were small. For example, Georgia had 75,000 people. Virginia had 10 times 750,000. Rhode Island didn't come to the Constitutional Convention because they didn't want the large states to take over the whole union. So you have to understand that the 9 small states did not trust the 4 populous states. It's kind of like if you live in northern New York, you don't trust New York City. I grew up in central Illinois. We didn't like Chicago because they have so much control over the state. So Americans fear high control of power. So in the last week of the convention, they had decided on the Congress and Supreme Court, et cetera. They had not decided how to elect the president. They talked about it all summer, did not decide. The last week, the last thing they did, they had a debate and discussion from the Committee 11 and then the whole body, which was 55 people. Shall we elect the president by popular vote? No. Only 1 delegate from Philadelphia voted for that.
Well, yeah.
Shall we have the Congress elect the president? No, because the Congress then will be a tool. The president will be a tool of the Congress. Matter of fact, George Washington didn't say anything in the Constitutional Convention, but during the meals, he would say to his colleagues, have you ever been on a ship in a storm without a captain? I did it for 7 years. I ran the Revolutionary War. I had 13 captains in the Continental Congress, and they couldn't even decide what to do, right? We need to have a leader, especially in emergencies. So number 3, shall we have an election of the president in each state and then aggregate those democratic elections? So if you think about it, people say, well, I believe in democracy. I don't like the Electoral College. Have I got a deal for you? We have 50 Democratic votes in our states, and then we aggregate it. So the World Series, is it the most runs or the most games?
Most games, most wins.
That's right. Same with Super Bowl, same with March Madness, et cetera. Well, 1960, the Pirates against the Yankees, the Pirates won 4 games, the Yankees won 3. This is Bill Mazeroski's walk-off home run that older people will remember. Well, in those 7 games, the Pirates had 27 runs. The Yankees had 55 runs, more than twice as many runs.
I did not know that.
Several World Series where the loser had many more runs than the winner.
That's a great comparison.
Right.
Wow.
So when people say, well, the most votes in every state, and then we aggregate those, just like we aggregate, when you get to the Final 4 in the March Madness, the basketball tournament, do those teams get there because they scored the most points? No, they won the most games, you see.
That's a great comparison.
Just like in tennis, you can go back and forth, and somebody has to win the game, and that becomes a victory. You go on to the next victory. So, for example, we've only had 4 presidents that didn't have the majority vote, although 2 of them, 1876 and 1888, were very close, so close that it's hard to tell. But in 2000 and 2016, we had Gore and Clinton both had more votes. Well, Trump won 30 states, Clinton 20. Bush won 30 states, Gore 20. We've only had 2 presidents that didn't win the majority of the states. That's Kennedy and Jimmy Carter. Every other president has won the majority of the states.
Where has, and I may be jumping ahead in the questions now because we only have a short time.
Yeah.
Where has there's always been, I'd say, criticism of the Electoral College, but was it 2016? It feels like now there's some push, some major push. Where did
there
this
is a
come?
major push.
Where
Yeah.
did it come from? Or where's where?
Good question. So in 2000, we had the Bush-Gore recount in Florida, which is a good reason we have the Electoral College, because every state is sealed off. Just think we had to have a national recount. My God, we would never do it. 180 million votes, we would never do it. No. So after that recount, a guy named John Koza, who is an engineer in California, he has the patent on the scratch-off lottery. So every time on that process, he has a patent. So every time somebody buys a lottery, John Koza gets money. And he was so upset because he was a Gore fan that he hired 2 professors to come up with a plan called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. 15 all Democratic states have passed this thing. And it's before the Michigan, Minnesota, and Maine legislatures today, and Nevada. All 4 legislatures are considering it. They have 195 electors. If they get to 270, we will have a constitutional crisis, because it goes into effect when they hit 270, which is the number of electors you need to be president. And so this came out of the Gore, the Bush-Gore recount.
Okay, and that's the question: what does it take to change this? People have asked me, and I don't know the exact answer, but you just said that to make this change, what legally has to happen?
To amend the Constitution takes 38 states, and they'll never do it because most of the states, 9 states have half of our people. The other states feed them. All right.
True.
Iowa is not New York, right?
Yeah.
So
it's not going to happen.
Well, amending the Constitution will not happen. This clever end run, which is very cynical, says in the model legislation, no matter how our state voters vote, our state government will tell our presidential electors to vote for whomever wins the national popular vote. It's really quite an insult to the voters of their own states. These state legislatures are saying, I don't care how people vote in Delaware, which has passed it, Connecticut, our electors shall vote for whoever wins in California and New York, probably, rather than how our own people voted. It's probably not constitutional. We have a compact clause in the Constitution that says interstate compacts must be okayed by the Congress. This has not been. And we have state constitutions like the Virginia Constitution that say other people from other states cannot determine who our elected officials are. And presidential electors are public officials. I've been one here in Virginia. And so there are lots of different constitutional challenges to this. But do we want to have in America right now, on election night, let's say 6 or 8 years from now, whatever, do we want to have a constitutional implosion where all of a sudden these state governments are telling electors, no, you have to vote for him, not for the people, not for the person that our state voted for? It's an effort to have majority tyranny by their large cities.
That would be mass chaos, in my opinion.
And Supreme Court would have to decide it, and and have more demonstrators in front of their homes, kind of like we've had recently. So we do not want to have the National Popular Vote Compact.
And something I tell people at times, if the candidates campaign to the way it is now, I lived in certain states that are certain red or blue, and I didn't see certain candidates. So if things were changed, I mean, they would campaign differently. The candidates are playing by the way the system is set up.
That's right.
Democrat and Republican, they campaign the way it is.
That's right. People play by those rules of the Electoral College. So when Trump defeated Mrs. Clinton, she went to California many, many times to raise money. Trump never went there. Maybe he went there once or something, but he went to Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, and she did not, because she took those for granted, and she went where the money was in California and the movie stars, et cetera, not where the voters were that she needed to win. They just, the hubris was pretty deep there, and Trump played the game the way it was designed, with very little staff and less money, and won the election.
Exactly. And sometimes you hear the argument, And I want to ask you, how does the U.S. system of electing heads of government compare with other republics? You hear this thrown in your face probably sometimes.
Oh my gosh. Well, I give a speech on this. And by the way, to your listeners, we give speeches all over the country for free. We have a travel budget, and we will come to their community, or we'll do a podcast, etc. But of the 27 countries in the European Union, how many have a direct national popular election of their head of government? The answer is 2, France and Cyprus. All the rest do what the British do. So I show my audiences a slide that shows the British Parliament, and I say, this is the Electoral College of Great Britain. Mr. Churchill was never on the ballot of all Englishmen, only his own constituency. We've had, in the last 6 months, we've had 3 prime ministers in England. Do you suppose they had a national election on that? No, they just, Israel in the last 2 years has had 5 prime ministers.
Yeah. So
these parliamentary systems don't have popular election at all. The current president of Italy, Giorgi.
Yeah, I can't pronounce the name.
Sorry, a little embarrassed.
No, that's fine.
But the current prime minister, her party got 25.8% of the vote. The lowest plurality of any American president was Lincoln, and 39.8% in 1860, when there were 4 people on the ballot. But the average European republic has 9 political parties, because if we had the parliamentary system, we'd have 12 or 15 parties, and we would have a new Speaker of the House every 3 months.
How worried, I don't want to say worried, but how concerned do people need to be, or do they think, oh, this won't happen? Or do they need to speak up? And what can they do to let their voices heard? The people that, don't want this. Should they just sit back, or should they stand up? And what
that's
can
why
they do?
I have a job.
Yeah.
There's 5 of us that Save Our States, and we do nothing but argue against the National Popular Vote Compact, and we explain why we have Electoral College, and we also lobby, and we hire a lobbyist, because the other side has millions of dollars from Mr. Koza and others in California and New York.
What can the average person, what can the average Joe
write your state legislator, talk to your state legislator, call them up. This is state legislative focus, and governors, of course. And so people right now in Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, and Nevada, their legislators are being asked right now to decide this. And it's been through in Minnesota, both the House and Senate committees, and it's heading to the floor for votes. In Michigan, it's not moving as quickly. In Maine, they're waiting on a possible hearing. So in Maine, it doesn't look like it will pass this year. But Nevada, because they have a Republican governor, this National Popular Vote Compact is only passed when the Democrats have the House, Senate, and governor. It's a trifecta of the blue states, if you will. And Maine, Minnesota, and Michigan are all Democrat-led governments. And that's what the people decided in those states. You have to respect that. But they have a Republican governor in Nevada, so they're trying to amend their constitution through a 2-step legislative process to get around the possible governor veto.
Wow. This shows that the other side, they won't stop. They'll do whatever it takes to try to whatever. But it makes last thing, it makes you think then if you're living in Montana or South Dakota, you figure, why the heck am I an American? My vote wouldn't mean a darn thing.
My gosh. So here's what I ask people. I say, how many acres in Central Park? Nobody knows. It's 843.
Okay.
How many of those acres are farmed? Everybody laughs. Oh no, they jog there. They walk their dogs there, right in the middle of what, 9 million people.
Yeah.
Well, they have Whole Foods in Manhattan, but they don't farm. Oh, I see. Iowa. They feed New York. That's why we have our first presidential primary there. And then we go to New Hampshire, which is a small town, retail politics. You have to have breakfast at least 3 times with every presidential candidate to get to know them, because across the breakfast table, people can tell whether or not you're a fake, right? Yeah. After you move to the bigger states, it's just TV advertisements and speeches on big platforms and TV ads and stuff. our ingenious system makes sure that people in Iowa and Kansas and other less populated states, it makes sure that they're not serfs, because they will not be serfs. They won't feed the cities. Los Angeles County has more people than 41 of our states. And nine states have half of our people. If we had national popular vote, presidential candidates would only visit the major cities, and they wouldn't go to 30 of our states at all. And we would not have a union. People would not have it. This is the linchpin of the Constitution.
And I know Republican, Democrat, but who knows, 100 years from now, where society will shift, it could be on the other foot. So
this should not be a Republican Democrat issue. This should be, do you love the constitutional design, the oldest constitution in the world? It has these checks and balances. It recognizes large versus small states. And you know what? John Kennedy and Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman and lots of Democrats used to love the Electoral College, and I can show you quotes from all of them. But the Democratic Party in the last 15 years has decided we're going to win every election by changing this rule. And if they would get their way, California and New York would probably decide every election.
And that's changing America.
Well, yeah. We will not have the United States of America. And that's why the founders did the compromise. You know, they didn't have a national popular vote. Only one delegate from Philadelphia voted for that, and all the rest did not. The other 54 did not, because they knew that they couldn't pass this. Remember, we had ratification conventions in all 13 states. Over 2,000 citizens participated in these debates and conventions, and they all voted to accept the Constitution. The Federalist Papers were written to publish in New York, because the New York Constitution, the convention in New York was split on whether or not to accept the Constitution. And so Hamilton got Madison up to New York from Virginia, and John Jay was already in New York. And the three of them wrote the Federalist Papers in New York as a series of op-ed arguments in New York, just to make sure New York would pass the Constitution. Wow. That's why we have the Federalist Papers, because New York was on the bubble. It was probably the most difficult state to get it through. Yeah.
So before I let you go, just once again reminding people, I have a lot of viewers here in Michigan, but Pennsylvania, other states. No matter what state you're in, let your voice be heard. That's simple as that. No matter if don't think you're just an average Joe, because those are the people that make a difference.
Everybody does.
Yeah. Thank you
very much.
Write your
legislators. They want to hear from you about this. Oppose the National Popular Vote Compact.